Good morning again. I am joined by a champion up here. I feel very fortunate. So let me introduce Becky. Those of you, I know we have a fan followership here. And by the way, Becky and Celia Slater, her partner, will be selling books after this. They've already set up in the hallway, so that's exciting. But to introduce Becky Burleigh, many of you know her. She's formerly a college soccer player, best known for her 26-year tenure at the University of Florida Gators soccer team, women's soccer team, where she led the Gators to a national championship. Prior to joining the Gators, she led her team to 2 NAIA championships in her early 20s. As a head coach, you should have been my mentor. As a head coach, Burleigh compiled an overall career record of 513, 160, and 46 ties. This past summer, she became the interim head coach of the professional women's soccer team, the Orlando Pride. Please join me in welcoming Becky Burleigh. Welcome. Tongue-tied. Very fortunate. And by the way, this is no Oprah Winfrey. I'll do my best, but I do have my note cards because there's a lot going on this week, so I couldn't memorize my questions. So good morning, Becky, and thank you for joining us. You and your partner are from Florida, right?
We are. I grew up in Massachusetts, but moved to Florida when I was 10. And that's actually how I got into soccer. We moved right across the street from a soccer field.
Oh, there you go. She's been playing for a while. So why don't you school us and tell us more about your coaching journey?
You know, it's funny when you ask that question, I get asked that a lot, and I kind of hesitate sometimes to share my path, especially with younger coaches, because it seems like in this era a little unrealistic. But what happened was I was playing soccer at Methodist College in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and I knew I wanted to coach. So from my freshman year on, I knew I wanted to coach. My parents didn't really think that was like a real job. So they were like, well, maybe you could like be a teacher and coach. And I was like, well, we'll see how this goes. So my junior year, I started writing letters to sitting head coaches. And I was like, well, I'm only a junior, but you know, in 2 years, I'm going to want a job and just keep your name in my mind. And so finally, my senior year, I accepted a graduate assistantship at Texas Christian University. And I was actually out there looking for an apartment. And the coach at Burleigh College in Rome, Georgia called me and said, hey, I'm getting ready to start a D1 program at Creighton, and I really think you would be great for this job. So I was like, I can't. I just took this job as an assistant at TCU. So he calls the TCU coach and says, you really should let her interview for this job because she has a chance to be the head coach here. Well, add to that story, I had graduated in May. This is in June. I'm 21. I could have a late birthday. I have no idea, like, to be a head coach. I don't think I'm ready for that by any stretch. But he calls the TCU coach, and the TCU coach is like, you should go for this. And I was like, okay. So I got the job at Burleigh at 21, was there for 5 years, and then the Florida job opened up, and I interviewed for that job at 26 and stayed at Florida for all of my career until the Orlando Pride in the last 6 months.
What kept you at Florida? That's impressive, and I know we have some coaches in here that have that similar tenure, but what kept you at the same institution for so long?
Well, first of all, Florida's commitment to all sports was huge, and that was like so noticeable even on my first day of the interview there. I really clicked with the other coaches. I knew that, you know, if all these programs at Florida were successful, soccer could step in and be successful too. Great leadership. Jeremy Foley was our athletic director at the time, and he was sort of a pioneer in athletic directors. Unusually in the SEC, he was not a football guy. Jeremy actually played lacrosse at Hobart. And so he just had this idea that all the sports were going to be good at Florida, not just football and basketball in terms of the revenue sports. And so that was a big part of it. My parents moved to Gainesville after, I think, maybe my 4th or 5th year. My mom had MS most of her adult life and was in a wheelchair. And so like being close to them and being able to support them was a huge part of my drive to stay in one place. And, you know, it was not a bad place to stay.
Yeah, not a bad place at all. So, well, congratulations on your tenure and your recent retirement.
Well, the first one lasted 10 weeks. So that was, we went through this whole big deal at Florida, being there for so long and the retirement. And then Celia and I were actually on vacation. We were fly fishing for the very first time in my life. And we get a call from the GM at the Pride, and their coach was leaving to go coach Manchester United in the UK. And it was mid-season. And so she was looking for someone to interim. And I was like, well, kind of sounds interesting, And so we came home early from the vacation. It all happened really fast. She called me on a Wednesday, went home on Friday, watched them play Friday night here in Orlando, and then Monday started coaching them. So it was just like, well, there goes retirement.
Wow. It happens to the best of us, right? For those of you who may not be familiar with What Drives Winning, which is the book that is on sale and Becky has had a big hand in, can you tell us a little bit more about kind of the vision and mission of What Drives Winning and how that got started?
Well, it's really interesting because when all this started between Brett and I, Brett Ledbetter is my business partner, it started because I was at a conference in New York City and I was listening to Daniel Coyle speak. He wrote the Culture Code, the Talent Code, and he was a great speaker if you've never heard him, and it's great books too. So I went up to him after he started speaking, after he was done speaking, and I said, hey, it would be great if you ever came to Gainesville. And I mean, he lives in Alaska, so I didn't really think this was realistic, but you never know. So he's like, oh, I was just in Gainesville like 2 weeks ago. And I'm like, seriously? And so he was friends with a guy on our men's basketball staff. And I've been at Florida a really long time. I feel like I know everyone in the Athletic Association, but I did not know this guy that he mentioned. So I get back to Gainesville, I look up at our little staff directory, and I see this guy named Mark Daignault, and he is an assistant to Billy Donovan, not an assistant coach, but an assistant to Billy on the men's basketball staff. So I call Mark, I'm like, hey, I would love to get together and have coffee with you. I told him the Daniel Coyle story. So that started like a regular thing. He introduced me to Brett because of the basketball world. Mark is now the current coach of the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I went to go watch Brett's basketball academy because Daniel was talking about this talent acquisition and how you can gain skill quickly if you chunk things and do all these different patterns of movement. So I'm thinking, this basketball footwork must have some application to soccer. So I go up to Brett's academy, we go through the whole footwork thing, and then in the afternoon he says, oh, we also do this other thing called the film room where we show these clips of really great coaches and players to our academy kids, and we talk about character, and that drives a big part of what we're doing with this academy. We did not talk about footwork the whole rest of the time. It was just so interesting to me how the videos were the speaker. So it wasn't Brett preaching to these kids about, being disciplined or being focused. It was these great athletes and great coaches talking about that, and those kids were listening to it. So I said to him, it'd be great if, he said, why don't we connect quarterly? And I was like, or, once a week. And so then it turned into kind of every day. He started working with my team at Florida. Some of the other coaches really caught wind of what we were doing and enjoyed it. Then he started coming down to Florida, and we did what we call a head coaches collaboration, which is where all of the head coaches get in one room and we talk about different subjects. And then we were thinking, well, if we do this with the Florida coaches, what if we did this on a national level? We just invited coaches in to have this collaboration, but we had to figure out a way to pay for it. So we're like, we'll have them speak and people might come and listen to that. So the very first conference we did was in St. Louis. I think we had 500 or 600 people there. And it was amazing. And ever since then, Brett's business as a consultant has kind of exploded. He had to leave the basketball academy, which I think was sad for him. But it also really exposed me to so many different coaches from so many different sports with interviews and opportunities to meet them and kind of pick their brain.
And speaking of lessons, because there's so many intangibles in coaching, right? In terms of far removed from the X's and O's, there's so many other things that are critical to success. What lessons have you learned through your experience, through What Drives Winning, and through coaching for as long as you have?
Wow, we don't have enough time for that. I think the biggest aha moment for me after listening to all these different coaches has been, so many times as coaches, we try to solve all our problems with X's and O's, and we think that is what is the problem with our team. When in fact, it's really like the more human-related issues that sort of trip us up. And that is something that we have done that exercise. We basically ask the players on the team and the staff to say, what are the top 3 things that can get in the way of us maximizing our ability? And almost never do they say anything about, we're not going to score enough goals or our defense isn't good enough. It's always like distraction, selfishness, complacency. But we don't really spend time working on those things as coaches. Like, how do we create, a prioritized curriculum to address those things that they are telling us are the things that are going to get in the way? And I think that the thing I noticed after interacting with all these different coaches is like the best coaches spend more time on that stuff than they do on the X's and O's. It's still really important to have, a great strategy and process, but the people are what's really driving that.
And how do you identify what those root causes are? If we know they're not X's and O's, how do you really figure out what are those root causes, and how do you specifically go about addressing them?
Well, that's the trick of it. I think when you ask the players what it is that's going to get in the way, they're seeing it through their lens, and they know what has caused the problems in the past. And so once they write down that list, if they say it's selfishness, well, how do we work on the character skill of unselfish? If they say it's distractions, how do we work on focus? And so once they've sort of given us the answers, and what's cool about it too is like every person in the room has a voice in this, because we ask them for the top 3 things. So if you've got 20 people on your team and you're asking for the top 3, you've got 60 answers of what is going to get in the way of your team. Now there's going to be some people that mention the same things, that keep coming up. And when you see that, like, that those are going to be at the top of the list, and that's how you prioritize that list as far as what you're going to start working on.
Great. And in terms of some podcasts, any podcast fans in here? I've been listening to some of Becky's podcast in preparation for my time with her today. But one of the things that that resonated with me was your bench cam. And I don't know if anyone here who uses bench cams. A lot of us do that these days. Back in '97, we didn't use bench cams, But could you tell us more about that and what your team has taken away from that experience?
Well, I'll tell you this, it's not just my team. I'll tell you what I have taken away, because I don't know how many cringe-worthy moments I've had, like watching myself on the bench cam, and I'm like, what am I doing? And who is that? But what it is, it's not like anything fancy, right? It's a camera that's set up that films the bench. And I don't, sit at home after a game and watch like 90 minutes of bench cam. I just sort of fast forward through it to see if there's some teaching moments from that, or if there's some issues, that I need to deal with. But one of the biggest things is like, what happens when somebody gets subbed off? How do they react? Because I see how they react when they come to me when they come off the field. I try to say something to every player that comes off, just so they don't go like worst case scenario in their mind, like I suck and I'm terrible. And like, I want to tell them like what I'm seeing and what the reason is that I'm taking them out. And for some, it might just be like, it's time for us to, make a tactical change. It has nothing to do with you. But then they walk past me, and then they, go get a drink or go to the end of the bench, and like, then what happens? And in our sport, there are more people in college soccer on the bench than there are on the field, right? So if we have 30 people on our team, there's only 11 people playing. So nobody really wants to be on the bench. You've got a lot of people on the bench. And so it can be like a place that's not super positive if you're not really paying attention. And the way that I got this idea, I think it was Coach Krzyzewski at Duke. When they film practices, it's just that because it's an indoor sport, like their bench, in games and in practices is all right there. So we had to actually set it up to have a camera, but man, like some great teaching moments have come from that, and positive ones too. Like when you see a player who's really like going all in, cheering for someone who's playing in their position. Like I love to highlight things like that with our team, because the player on the field might never notice that. But when we show it in like our highlight clips at the beginning of the week, like, well, look at Jesse cheering for Cassie, and they both play the same position. Like, that's amazing teamsmanship. So things like that, the positive things I think I show with the team, the things that maybe aren't so positive, I would do on a one-on-one basis with a player.
Great. Let's talk about culture. We all know that's a critical, again, intangible that is so important to our success. How do you define culture, and how do you build a positive culture?
You know, that culture word is really a buzzword for sure. I mean, I think that one of the things that I've noticed is, like, what are you doing as a coach to create the environment that you want? And I think that's a really important question that we all need to ask ourselves all the time. But I think that, you know, one of the things, I just taught a class last semester at UF, it's called What Drives Winning Environments. And the whole model of what drives winning environments is defining, managing, and modeling your expectations. So even as a really veteran coach, I felt like that book helped me so much get clarity on where I needed to go, because even like defining, you know, there are things that happen that I get really mad about with our team. Like, somebody does something really stupid. But then I have to go back and, like, did I define that? And if I haven't defined that, then I need to make sure that I use that as more of a teaching moment. Now, if I have defined it, like, I'll give you a perfect example. I think everybody can relate to this one. So, you know, last year or 2 years ago now, when COVID first happened, our team is coming back. We know that we don't know if we're going to have a season. We don't know what's going on, but we know our team is coming back to start preseason. So we have these big conversations with our team about, like, you can't have big gatherings. You can't, you know, do the things that you've done in the past. Well, we're probably 3 weeks in, and our team decides they're going to have a birthday party for someone on our team that turns into like a Instagram all-athlete bash, you know? And in the brilliance of our team, like, they're like making it to where, like, hey, if you come to the party, we're like making it like a white party, so wear a white shirt. So now, like, hundreds of people are there in white shirts, so it's not hard to identify that this is a large gathering. The police come, they break up the gathering, they, you know, cite the two people who own the apartment. And so I'm thinking to myself, like, I thought we, like, really clearly defined this issue about COVID. But in the end, like, I had defined it, but I did not give them tools to say, like, okay, when more people start coming, how do you say no? Like, how do you regulate that situation? And so that's a perfect example of, like, did my definition maybe go far enough? And then from a managing standpoint, you know, we think about all the times, like, I'm trying to manage behavior. When we think of things that are bad, like things that go wrong, how do I manage someone coming out of a game and pouting? But there's also things that happen that are really good. So, like, managing the good things and being able to point those out so that people can learn from the good. It's like if you had a video that you were showing your team and you only showed them their mistakes all the time, that's going to kind of be a negative experience. But if we can highlight some of the positive things too, so, like, I look at managing as, like, catching the above the line behavior, but then converting the below the line behavior. And then I think the thing that is probably most often overlooked is the modeling part of it. Like, what am I doing that models the behavior that I'm looking for? So if I am, you know, yelling to our team, relax, like, that's kind of a mixed signal, you know? So like, how's my behavior modeling what I'm asking my athletes to do?
Athletes come and go, and in sustainability of success and sustainability of culture, and your coaching philosophy obviously takes work. How did you go about your approach to sustaining success and sustaining the culture that you wanted to develop with your team?
You know, that's a really good question, because I think one of the hardest things is in the whole process of, you know, what we do, we recruit people into our program. And, you know, it's very easy to get blinded by talent or what someone can do on the field, instead of making sure that that also fits with what you are trying to get. So with us, like we really tried to make our culture part of our program in all ways. So something like trying to find a way to like brand things that we do. So for example, like in the spring, which is our non-championship season, we would devote 1 day a week, which was a practice time, to we asked the players at the beginning of the semester, what are the things that you want to learn more about that have nothing to do with soccer? And they would give us a list. And again, everyone has a voice. We would prioritize the list, and then we would set up programming that dealt with those issues. So, things for us would be like dealing with finances, taxes, even investing for that age group. We a lot of players in Florida, because we have nice weather, like they drive like scooters, like Vespas. So we did scooter maintenance because scooters break down a lot. Showed them how to like jump a car, in case you ever get stuck. So just different things that have nothing to do with soccer. And we called that Real World Weekly. And every week, every Wednesday, we would have a guest speaker come in and talk to them about whatever those topics were. Well, because we had sort of branded it and we sort of put it out there on social media and things like that, like kids that we were recruiting would ask me questions about like Real World Weekly. And then that's just like one tiny segment. So for example, another thing we have done with our team for years is the DISC assessment, like a behavior assessment. And so in the recruiting process, we give the recruits like a little free version of DISC, and then we talk about DISC on our recruiting calls. So like I feel like they already know coming in sort of what they're coming into, and when they do come in, they've bought into that from the beginning. So it's not like, I'm putting on this dog and pony show to get them to come to Florida, and then they come there and they're like, got to do all this self-help stuff? Like, what's that all about? It's like a very smooth transition because they know what they're stepping into, and they actually want that. That's why they're coming. And so I think it just becomes a very seamless transition of people coming into your program knowing what to expect from a culture perspective.
Are you a D?
I am an ID. I think I've gotten D is big for my job, and it gets smaller when I'm outside of my job, but yeah, I definitely have some D in me.
How many of you have taken the DISC? How many Ds? I'm imagining we have a lot of Ds in the room. Yeah, raise your hand if you're a D. Yeah, it's okay. There's no shame in D. D's are...
Can I say one thing about that? For those of you guys who know DISC, I think it's really interesting because my neighbor was another coach at Florida, and she was definitely a D. And all the leaders that she had on her team, that her appointed leaders, were Ds. And I think that there are some people out there who aren't Ds, because Ds are very direct, decisive. There's some introverts that are really amazing coaches and really amazing leaders. And I think that's one of the best things about something like DISC is it gets you to appreciate what other people bring, even if it's not like yourself. I had a high C on my team. Cs are very contemplative and like thoughtful, like it takes them a while to get somewhere. And literally when we would have a one-on-one meeting, I would say to her, so what do you think about that? Silence. And as an ID who's really fast-paced, like I would start supplying answers for her. And so I finally had to discipline myself to be like, all right, I'm gonna work on this email. When you're ready, just let me know. And that gave her the space to think about things. And when she answered, her answers were amazing because they were super thoughtful. Whereas if I'm sitting across from another high D, I ask them a question like that, they're giving an answer, and I don't even know if they've heard the question. So I just think that all those tools, it's so helpful for them to understand themselves and other people.
That's great. I'm a CD, so right at noon, if those of you have taken the DISC, I'm right at C and D, which is kind of a unique combo. So the game is the teacher. We've never heard that before, have we? The game is the teacher. So looking back at your successful career, what are the lessons that soccer has taught you?
Ooh, another one that could take all day. I don't know how you all see your sport, but in soccer, we talk a lot about soccer is a player's game. It's not a coach's game. And the reason it's a player's game is because we don't have timeouts. We don't have the ability to, like, honestly, once a game starts, you're at the mercy of the game. And there's no such more than that than when I was coaching the pro team here in Orlando. You know, like, this team has amazing superstars on it. Alex Morgan, Marta, Ashlyn Harris, Allie Krieger, all like national team players, right? And, you know, like, am I going to tell them something in the game that's really going to change the outcome of the game? Probably not. But that means my job is that week leading up to the game, have I done everything I need to do to prepare them? And in the end, there's some like predictable events that are going to happen in every game, and there's some unpredictable events that are going to occur. And so I think my job as a coach is to, for sure, be prepared for the predictable events, because we know that's going to happen. But also try and cover as much of the unpredictable events that are possible to happen. You're not going to cover everything, but if I can give the players a platform so that they can coach themselves, they're going to be prepared to handle those situations regardless. You know, I want to tell a really quick story about this because it was really powerful. Baylor was playing Oklahoma State in the Big 12 football championship this year. And the game came down to the last play of the game. I mean, literally, seconds were ticking off the clock, and Oklahoma State had the ball not even 5 yards, maybe like 3 yards from the end zone. And the play gets ready to run. There is some disruption on the field, and like people are standing up, like looking like it's almost like a timeout, but then I know what it was. The team called the timeout, but they didn't have timeouts left. So the team that called the timeout couldn't take the timeout. The team that thought the team was calling the timeout got disrupted because of that. And then all of a sudden they're back in it and they have to make the play. The Oklahoma State tries to run. It literally comes this close to the end line, and the Baylor player makes a tackle, and Baylor ends up winning the game. So the reason I tell that, like, that is an extremely unpredictable event at the end of a game. I don't think I've ever seen a football game where a timeout was called and the team didn't have timeouts left. I mean, that did happen in basketball for Michigan back in the day. But in football, I've never seen that happen, right? So all those guys were in a position where they had to adjust on the fly to what was going to happen next. Both sides, Oklahoma State and Baylor. And the Baylor coach, if you haven't followed this guy, his name is Dave Aranda. He's amazing. He had spent the whole year, and actually the year before too, because this is only his second year, trying to get these guys, like asking them questions and then trying to get them to come up with the answers. Well, one of his very influential players was like, dude, like, we just want the answers. Like, stop making us find them. Like, just tell us the answers because you know it. And he said to them, you know, there's going to come a time where I can't give you the answer, and you're going to have to figure out the answer on your own. And then lo and behold, this situation happens at the end of the Big 12 championship game. But I think that's such a great metaphor for all of us, in that, like, coaching isn't about giving them the answers. I think coaching is about preparing them to be able to find the answers themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Who doesn't agree with that, right?
Can I get an amen?
Can I get a hallelujah? Can I get an amen? We have some younger coaches, some newer coaches with us, and we want to continue to provide the resources and platform for their development so that they can stay for 26 years and have successful careers like yourself and many others. What sage advice would you give younger coaches that are just starting out, that may be flailing a bit to understand, is it worth the work-life balance? Where do I go from here? What does success look like? What would you tell them?
You know, interestingly, in the last day, I've had conversations with two pretty young coaches, both women, and both who are trying to make big decisions about their next steps. And one of the things that I've found it really interesting is that courage to take the next step that feels scary is a hard thing to come by. And it's affected by so many different factors. So I'll give you an example. This one coach I spoke to yesterday has an opportunity for a very, very prestigious job, but it would be her first head coaching job. She's an assistant. And there's a couple other people who have turned down this job. So she tells her assistant coach, she tells her head coach as the assistant that she's looking at this job. And the head coach is like, wow, like they're going after you? Like that's crazy. They must be kind of desperate at this point. And it really hurt her feelings. Like, and she didn't mean it. Like, I know that sounded terrible, but I think she meant like the time is getting tight for this decision to be made, and they've gone through a couple people who have said no. But the impact that had on that assistant coach, she called that institution that morning and was like, I don't think I'm ready for this. So then, her sister, her twin sister, is a really good friend of mine. So she calls me, and then the twin calls me. And I'm like, no one's ready. You think I was ready at 21 when I started at Barry? Like, no one is ready. I'm like, here's my question for you. Do you believe that you're a good learner? Yes. Do you believe that you have the ego to be able to put people in positions around you that might have better strengths than you do in certain areas and empower them? Yes, this woman is super humble. I said, okay, so you know you can learn, you know you have the ability to put people in positions around you and empower them. That's all you need. Like, that's literally all you need. The rest you will figure out. Like, nothing prepares you for being a head coach. You just have to do it. And then the second one, she wrote me an email. She sends me a screenshot of a coach that has said, hey, I received your information. I'm really interested in you. I'd like to talk to you about my assistant job. So she sends me the screenshot, and below it she writes, well, I'm sure he's just being nice, but do you think you would reach out to him for me? And so I texted her back and I wrote, I just want you to go back and reread what you just sent me. And then I like put a little space in my text, and I was like, first of all, I think no head coach is going to waste their time on an assistant candidate that they're not interested in. And if you don't believe in you, why would anyone else believe in you? So then she texts me back and she writes, let's try this again. She sends me the screenshot and she's like, look at this great opportunity that I've just gotten. Would you mind reaching out? And so I think my advice would be that, like, there is no best timing. There is no, perfect launching point. It just comes down to your willingness to be a person who will learn on the job. And like the first person I mentioned, I was like, she goes, well, these are like really good players. Like, what if, I'm not capable of coaching that level? I'm like, stop. I was like, you have the ability to serve. Like, this woman is humble. She's a servant. Like, she is an amazing person. I was like, the only thing they're interested in is how can you help them get better? And you're going to help them get better as a person, and you're going to help them get better as a coach. If you can do those things, you're going to be an amazing coach. And so it's not about having all the answers. I think sometimes it's just about your willingness to put yourself out there. And that's hard, and it's scary. When I took the Pride job, I'm like, I'm going to coach Marta? Like, seriously? And so when I said yes to it on the vacation, then I actually got there on Monday. I'm like, oh, this is like kind of scary. And so, it's just like, you just put yourself out there. And I remember we came to practice. We were probably like a month into it. And Marta comes up to me and she's like, so boss. I'm like, wait, Marta. I'm like, I'm not really your boss. And she goes, well, yeah, like in this situation, you're like kind of my boss. And I'm like, how about we look at this as a collaborative effort? And so I just think that it's how you decide that you're going to be a coach. It's not about like having the answers. And the last thing I would say that is, I told the one woman who was looking at this prestigious position, I said, you know what, and sorry, I'm not trying to offend any men in the room here, but I'm like, there are like 100 guys who have less life experience than you and less college experience, and they think they are the #1 candidate for this job. So why are you questioning yourself when all you have to do is have this open mind about your ability to serve and your ability to learn? So she's back in the mix with this job. We'll keep our fingers crossed and see what happens.
That's awesome. You sound like a great mentor. Did you have a mentor when you were in your youthful years of coaching, and who did you look up to for inspiration?
The word mentor is interesting to me because I feel like it automatically puts you like this a little bit, and I really like it more like this. I feel like one of my biggest strengths is that I am not afraid of rejection, which is a very good skill in the recruiting game, as we all know. So I will ask people, like when I asked Daniel Coyle, like, are you coming to Gainesville? I had no expectation that he would ever come to Gainesville. I have asked, like, Nick Saban, can you be part of What Drives Winning? Of course, I haven't asked him directly because I haven't even gotten to that level yet. But I've probably been rejected like 10 times with that request, but there will be an 11th. So I think it's just a matter of continuing to be willing to ask people for help. And sometimes I do think you've got to figure out, like, with that person, what is the best way to do that. I remember at Florida, it was probably not very far into my career at Florida, maybe 7 or 8 years. And there was another coach down the hall, and we had both been in the NCAA tournament. We both exited earlier than we expected from the NCAA tournament. So I went down the hall and I was like, hey, like, can we talk about this? Because, I feel like we both sort of underachieved in this situation, and what I would love to just pick your brain on that. And she was like, we didn't underachieve. And I was like, take that back. So having to figure out okay, so how do, that was probably the wrong approach. So maybe it's just trying to figure out what you can do to unlock that person in terms of them and you collaborating. And it's not always just that part is not a one-way street. I think it's having to give and take. So if that coach needs something and I can help them in any way, how do we make this to where both of us feel like it's not just me always going to her, and what can I do to support her in any way?
Great. Coaches tend to burn the candle at both ends, right? Who in here doesn't do that? How did you manage that, and how did you take care of you as your long-tenured coach in your long-tenured coaching career?
That is such a really good question that I think doesn't get asked enough in our profession, and I only think it's getting harder, by the way. The class I'm teaching right now at UF is called What's Really Important, and that whole class is about this subject. And I think that the whole work-life balance thing, I'm not sure that really is true. I think it's more how do you integrate your life and your work? And for me, one of the things is that I always really loved going to my office. I loved the people that were there. We were in a building with multiple sports, and so that was really fun to interact with track or volleyball or lacrosse. And that made me enjoy going into work. And actually when COVID hit, that was really hard for me because there was no one to go into, and there was no one there. And so I feel like with me, what I would try and do is, one, I like the people. Two, I would build in exercise into my day in the middle of the day. And that was also getting outside, so that felt good. I was lucky having my parents close, and having my family right there made a big difference. Celia has been a coach, and so she understood that world, and she knew there were times where she needed to support me more during certain parts of the year, and then maybe in other parts of the year I would try to return that favor when I wasn't in such a crazy mode. But I think it's more about integrating your life, healthy habits, keeping perspective, making time for the people that are really important to you, and not letting your job, don't trade minutes for something that doesn't have a long-term payoff for you.
Good advice. Good advice. Can we follow that advice? That's the key. I think we're going to open it up to questions so that we have the opportunity for you all to ask questions. So Becca's going to be our mic runner.
Go Becca.
and she is going to get some questions for Becky that you guys might have. So raise your hand if you have a question for Becky.
And while Becca's doing that, just so you all know, I'll try to put up a slide here at the end, but would love to have any of you involved with What Drives Winning. We do have some books outside if you're interested in those, but we also have like a coaching lab. One of the things I forgot to mention in that last question is finding a community of like-minded people, I think, is really important. Because if you are surrounded by people who only value you for your wins and losses, that's a really tough existence. And I think that community, especially when it's coaches who are pursuing the same things you're pursuing, but they're pursuing it in the way that you want to pursue it, like that's what our coaching lab is. I love that lab. And then obviously anybody who's looking for a master's, come sign up for a class. Go ahead, Becca.
So you prepare your team for the unpredictable, like Bill Belichick, every Friday we practice that. So the unpredictable happens, how do you handle yourself on the sideline?
Ooh, good question. You know, I think I was on a podcast and I said something about emotional control. And I think I said something like, I think emotional control is underrated in coaching. And so the person of the podcast quoted me, put it on social media, and then like a lot of people respond to that. And they're like, well, and both positive and negative. It was interesting because some people were like, well, you know, emotions are part of sports. Like you need to be emotionally have a big range. And then some people were like, yeah, but like if you ride the wave, then it's ups and downs. And it was really interesting. I'm seeing both sides of that. But I think for me, it's like, here's my best modeling tool I could give you. Okay, I want to make a t-shirt of this and wear it to anytime I'm in an athletic competition or practice or anything. It says, if I want my team to blank, then I need to blank. And just think of all the applications for that. Like if I want my team to be focused, I need to be focused. If I want my team to be poised under pressure, then I need to be poised under pressure. So for me, like, I think when I've done my best coaching is when, this is gonna sound like a little weird, but just stick with me for a second. It's not like when I watch the game through my eyes, it's like when I feel like I can sit behind myself and watch myself watch the game. That sounds weird, but like it helps me separate just a little bit because then I can say to myself, like, what does my team need right now? And so in terms of that range of emotion, like when my team is flat, like my team might need emotion from me. They might need me to get them fired and get them going up. But when tensions are high, like they don't need that. They need me to calm them down. It's almost like this counterbalancing effect of coaching. And when I look at the game through my eyes, sometimes I get swept up in that wave of like, oh, like I'm fired up at that ref too. Instead of like when I'm sitting back here, I'm like, okay, things are getting out of control. The ref is making some crazy decisions. I need to get my team back on track. So I think, I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but I think when those unpredictable events occur, whatever the team needs to deal with that unpredictable event, I need to be able to model.
Great. Who has another question? We have some questions over here on this side of the room.
Getting her steps in.
She is.
Who just had their hand up? Oh, hi.
What would you say your biggest keys were in building a culture that allowed you to build a championship team in 3 years, other than Danny coming back from an ACL?
That's a really good question. I think at Florida, one of the things that we did was, so at that time, UNC is still very good, but at that time they were in the middle of that dynasty of, I think they've won 22 national championships. And we decided from the very beginning that we were gonna play UNC every chance we could. So the first year we had a team, we played them, and we lost 9-0, okay? Like, losing 9-0 is humiliating, and I think, honestly, like, Anson told them to stop scoring because they could have been worse. So then, you know, we played them that spring. We played them the next fall. Like, we played them literally every chance we could. And it was maddening because I remember the next time we played them, we thought like, oh my God, we are so much better. We are going to kick their butt. We lost like 5-0. So it was just one of those things where we thought like, we're going to put ourselves in the fire over and over again until we can unlock this puzzle of like what it is that like, there's no doubt if you play a team like Carolina, every single one of your weaknesses is going to get exposed. And for us, instead of looking at that as like, this is going to be humiliating, we looked at it as this is going to show us what the gap is to where we need to be. And like that change in the mindset of what that game was for our team was huge in our ability to make leaps quickly, because they weren't dreading that game. They were going, like, there was a little bit of fear because, you know, like, you don't want to get embarrassed. But there was also this idea of like, all right, like, we're going in here to figure out like what it is that we got to work on. And once everybody bought into that, it made that way more palatable. And I think that helped us make steps quickly. And then you just cannot underestimate like charismatic leaders. You know, some people ask like, are leaders born or are they made? I think you can make a leader, but you can't make charisma. And we had charisma on that team. We had Abby Wambach was a freshman. Danielle Fotopoulos, who is still the NCAA's leading goal scorer ever, was a senior. And, you know, when you have two players like that are World Cup level players that are strikers on your team, I mean, that goes pretty far in winning a national championship. And I would tell you this too, like, I think this is another thing I've learned from all these coaches. Never underestimate the power of luck in winning. Because it's like, I mean, we at the end of that game, Carolina was pounding us, and we were just turning away their shots. We were doing everything we could to hang on. One of those goes an inch different, like, that's not the same game. And so luck plays a huge role in it also. I was born on Friday the 13th, so I know I have a little lucky gene.
Next question.
We must have answered them all.
Any other brave question? Okay, we have a question.
I don't need the mic.
She's got a coaching voice.
Yeah, she does.
You mentioned, I'm a big soccer geek, so you mentioned some of these players that you've coached. In your coaching career when they're younger, so in Abby Wambach, did you know at that time what type of player she would be? And then I'm also just curious what the relationship was like once your players then go into the national team and to starting.
Abby was a really interesting person to coach. Well, first of all, when Abby made the decision to come to Florida, it was like the soccer world was like, really? Because at that point, our program was really young. She could have gone anywhere. And honestly, if you ask Anson Dorrance at UNC, because that was where everybody thought she was going, he was like, I should have offered her a full scholarship from the beginning. And he didn't. I was like, thank you, Anson. But again, luck played into that too. You know, Abby's mom called me at one point and she's like, I really think Abby's getting close to make a decision. You need to call her right now. I was like, okay, thanks. And so like that is sort of like, you know, Abby was going to always make an unconventional decision. And if you followed her at all, like, she is just an unconventional person in her life. And so it's no surprise that she made this unconventional decision to go to Florida. When she got to Florida, you know, I would just say that Abby really enjoyed her collegiate career as a student and an athlete. And that made her challenging to coach because Abby was one of the toughest people as a player that I've ever met. Like, she could do a blinder all night and come the next day and perform like no other. Problem was, some of her teammates could not. And so, you know, it's like a challenge to coach someone like Abby because, you know, her ability, like, to bring performance whenever she needed to, was such a huge part of our team. And she made you feel like you could bring out your best performance too, because she would empower that in you. So really good leader in that way. But then, like I said, when you're taking teammates with you on this, you know, social roller coaster that they can't handle, that was a challenge. And you always knew that Abby was going to be, like, you could tell from the beginning that she was a special talent. The question was, would she, as she continued to ascend to different levels, at some point she was going to have to make some changes in her lifestyle, which she did. And then once that happened, I mean, there was just no stopping her. But I think my favorite part of Abby was watching her in her last World Cup that she played in, where she was a role player off the bench. And how she handled that whole situation was amazing. And I think that, to me, really shows the real Abby. When she was in her glory, like, you know, no stopping her. She was a force of nature. But when she was in that role of being a supporting player, how she handled that, I think, showed her true character.
Do you still talk to Abby?
I do, actually. I just talked to her the other day. Actually, it's the 50th anniversary of athletics at UF, and we're trying to get her to come back and give us a big rallying, culminating event. But she is now in LA in the NWSL, the Pro League. The LA team has really got a lot of celebrity owners, and she's part of that. So she was living in Florida and has just moved out there to support that even more. She's one of the owners.
You know who to call if we ever want Abby at our convention, right?
May the force be with you. We're trying to get her to Florida.
I was going to say, she's probably pretty popular. I know she is. So I think we're close to time. But any parting thoughts, Becky, that you would like to share with the field hockey coaching community?
You know, I will tell you this. I think that one of the things that I respect about the field hockey community, you know, we've been sitting out in the hallway, and Celia was the director of the NCAA Women's Coaches Academy, which I know a lot of you went to. Let's give it for Celia. And the reason I bring that up is because I so respect how field hockey coaches are willing to invest in themselves, because I think so many coaches aren't. And I don't know if that's a culture of your sport, of your organization, like where that's coming from, but I think it's such a great environment to be in when the people who are in this room, and probably people who couldn't even make it to this room, are willing to invest in themselves to further their career, which then also furthers the experience for the student athlete. So I would just really like to give a shout out to all of you guys for that. And I will put up a slide here at the end that's going to have a QR code on it. And if you just take a picture of that with your phone, it'll take you to, we're going to do, like, we have some opportunities for education too, and it's all self-paced, so you can do it at your own. You can join the coaching lab, you can buy books, but we're going to give you guys a good discount with that if you click on the QR code. So appreciate your willingness to educate yourselves.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us this morning. Round of applause for Becky. Thank you, thank you. And we will also have the pleasure of Becky and Celia and Sam, our legal counsel, tonight for our fireside gender equity chat, which is really just an invitation to dialogue about how far we've come in gender equity and how far we still have to go. So we look forward to that conversation. So if you want to get that slide up,
I can do
then
that.
I can, we actually have a break coming up. And so,
yeah, we have a 15-minute break now, and we can visit our vendors. Also, the books are out there with Celia and Becky. They're going to move out there where the books are. College group is going to come back in where we're sitting right now. Scholastic and Club was going to go into the exciting back corner of the room. All right, so you have a 15-minute break. That's about 10:50. Thank you.
Thanks, that was really good.